Hey Meta, who is Andrew Bustamante?
Which covert missions have shaped the course of world politics? How does the CIA maneuver the complexities of modern conflicts? What secret knowledge does the CIA have of extraterrestrial life? And how can you protect your personal and digital security from all the electronic spies monitoring you 24/7?
Apple promises that they protect your data.
Right.
They sell it. Apple false advertises about what they do with your data.
Today, Andrew Bustamante, a former covert CIA intelligence officer with unparalleled insights into global espionage and strategic intelligence, will join us today on Into the Impossible to answer these questions and more.
There's two types of CIA. There's the pre-9/11 CIA, everything up to 9/11, and then there's the post-9/11 CIA.
In this undercover episode of Into the Impossible, we discuss the mysteries of global government security and the evolving role of intelligence in warfare, and the strategies that drive global and personal security policies. If you value your security and safety, better watch this episode.
Andrew, thanks for coming down to San Diego to do this podcast.
I mean, it doesn't take much to get me to say yes to San Diego, and this is my first time at UCSD, and what an awesome campus.
It's such an honor to have you here, and you're a fan favorite, requested for a long time. About 2 or 3 years ago, a local San Diegan by the name of Tom DeLonge, I don't know if you ever heard of him.
The name.
He was in Blink 182. He did a podcast live with me, and he now is associated with this To the Stars Academy,
Yes.
which is about finding evidence for aliens. And we did a podcast along with a man named Jim Semivan.
Yep.
You ever
I
heard
know
of
Jim
that?
Semivan as well.
Okay, so I'm going to do this. Jim Semivan, when I was sitting right over there, told me and Kurt Jaimungal that the CIA is prohibited from doing psychological ops or spying or deceiving the American public. He got roasted in the comments. Andy, tell me, is it true? Is the CIA allowed to spy on and do psychological operations on ordinary civilians?
It's a mixed question. It's not a clear yes and no. And here's why. There's two types of CIA. There's the pre-9/11 CIA, everything up to 9/11, and then there's the post-9/11 CIA. Pre-9/11 CIA was kind of the Wild West. And they did stuff that was not sanctioned. They did stuff that was kind of wacky. They did anything it took, essentially anything it took to protect the American people, including, drugs and experimental tests, experimental weapons, you name it. After 9/11, essentially what 9/11 showed us is that the pre-9/11 CIA was not up to the task of protecting the American people. That's what we all learned coming out of September 11th. And that's when you saw a massive increase in funding, a massive scaling up in size, but also an increased amount of oversight that started to hem in what CIA could and couldn't do. So to answer your question about today, 2024, CIA cannot unilaterally execute operations against American citizens. In order to do anything against the American people or anything that involves an American citizen, which could include a foreigner who is undercover for a foreign country who gains their American citizenship. People don't realize that is a very real thing. Seeding operations from Russia, from China, from Cuba, from Iran. They send people here to gain American citizenship, to gain the rights and privileges of American citizens, because then they cannot be touched, right? So in order to combat that threat, CIA must partner with FBI or must partner with the Customs and Border Patrol in order to do any kind of operation against a known or suspected U.S. citizen. There's a great deal of judicial support that has to be engaged in, and there's a legislative policy that has to be engaged in. But all of that to say, yes, CIA can operate against American citizens with proper authorities, partners, judicial review, and only when it's warranted. And the frequency of that is so low that the average American doesn't have to worry about it. But if you are the kind of person who is nefariously here, you're not really safe from us. We can find you.
And when we think about things like the recent testimony by people like David Grush, who's also Air Force veteran, I believe, they talk about data and access and who gets to see what. And I'm wondering, to what extent does an ordinary citizen have the right or maybe the entitlement, perhaps the responsibility, to obtain data and access to things that the government needs to maintain secrecy, perhaps?
And it's a great question. And I think, unfortunately, people need to accept that just like parents want to keep secrets from their kids, wives want to keep secrets from their husbands, you want to keep secrets from your mom and dad, And you do it for their best interest, right? Like your mom and dad don't need to know the things that keep you up at night. Your kids don't need to know the things that keep you up at night. You don't want to know the kinds of things that keep your teenage kids up at night, right?
That's right.
The same thing is true with government secrets. The stuff that keeps senior administrators up at night, you don't fucking want to know that. You do not want to know. Not only is it incredibly detailed, incredibly boring, it's also usually it's not something that's going to get resolved quickly, right? The Iran problem that keeps people up at night is not going to get resolved in the next 24 hours. Right. It's going to keep them awake for the next 3 years. So why bother the American people with that? First of all, you've got to think that the government looks at the American population as an economic engine. They don't see them as people. They don't see them as civilians or kids or innocents. They see them as a functional, productive entity, an organism. The job of that organism is to create economic power, GDP. So the reason we keep America safe is to keep the economic engine safe that generates the GDP that pays the bills for the largest military, the most capable military, the most capable intelligence service in the world, which then protects the engine that generates the GDP, and you can see how the cycle goes. That's all it is. The problem is that the American people think that they should be seen as individuals. They don't realize they're a collective. Once you accept the fact that your individuality, you have independence and freedoms that were granted to you by a government that sees you as one piece of a larger organism. As soon as you threaten the organism, like a criminal does, then you get taken out. You get taken out of that organism and put somewhere else. So you are not entitled to know what the government knows to keep you safe. You're not. You're entitled to know what it takes for you to do your job as the organism that creates the GDP. The same way that parents protect their children by keeping secrets and spouses protect each other by keeping secrets. If you want to know someone else's secrets, look at the mirror, look at yourself in the mirror and say, am I willing to share my secrets with the world? Because if you're not willing to be fully transparent with the world, you have no reason to expect that somebody else should be transparent with you, especially not the US federal government.
Yeah, to the audience members, screaming into their iPhones and computers, how dare he say that? I remind myself of this Simpsons episode from 20 years ago or whatever, when something's happening and the CIA is like spying on Homer Simpson, and Lisa's like, well, who will watch the Watchers if nobody? And Homer goes, I don't know, the Coast Guard. But so in that case, who does watch the Watch? If we are not entitled as the taxpayers who pay your salary when you're serving your country, and it's a great debt of gratitude that we owe people that serve the country, but it's also a responsibility. So how do you balance that need for transparency and the need for secrecy? To quote Jack Nicholson, Few Good Men, great movie, you want me on that wall, you need me on that wall, without me on that wall you can't sleep at night. So how do you balance those trade-offs between your right to know for something like aliens? Is that really rising to the level of something that the US government needs to protect us against?
Right. And so oftentimes your question is very valid, and I don't think there's a good answer for it yet. Who watches the Watchers is very much a question that's still being answered, like we saw with 9/11, like we've seen with overreaches of American privacy laws, as we've seen with the overreach of social media, right? Like watching the Watchers is becoming a very real challenge, especially because technology is advancing faster than policy. It's advancing faster than human thought. It's advancing faster than social norms. And technology is giving us capabilities that 10 years ago we didn't think we'd ever have. Do you remember Charlie's Angels?
Yeah.
Charlie would port in
I had a poster of them on my bed, over my bed.
Sorry, I can see why.
Sorry,
I can see
why.
But he would port in on a TV screen in their car, and there'd be a video call. That was 1970 something, and we were like, that's never going to happen. Now that happens all the time. You can have 4 video calls simultaneously, right? 1 from your phone, 1 from your tablet, 2 from your different computers in different windows on the same operating system. Remember when you could only have 1 window open at a time?
Yeah.
So technology moves so fast, society has a hard time keeping up with it. So the question of who watches the Watchers boils down to really 2 things. 1, trusting the branches of government. We have a legislative branch, a judicial branch, an executive branch. Your intelligence services fall, for the most part, under the executive branch. The checks and balance to the executive branch still come from the legislative branch and the judicial branch. Your intelligence community is operating at the behest of the president, but funded by the legislative branch. So if the House doesn't agree with what's happening, they can simply cut off funding to the IC. The judicial branch is who holds us accountable. We can go to jail. what people don't realize, every intelligence officer, when they reach full performance, which is a point in their career where they're deemed to be a full performance officer, meaning they can do all the various operational acts required of them in their role, the first thing they have to do is get professional liability insurance, because they can be sued by any member of the public, by any member of the foreign entity, right? They are individually culpable under the judicial branch. So who watches the watchers is largely the checks and balances of the state. But then you have what you were highlighting, compartmentalization, which is also known as need to know. And there are many, many operations where need to know does not extend to the judicial or the legislative branch as a whole. It only extends to a few minority people in those whose job it is to provide oversight. And oftentimes those individuals can be corrupted to the cause, right? If you have 2 or 3 judges and 2 or 3 senators who are all right in on the same operation, but everyone agrees that the biggest threat in the world is North Korea, you're going to see everybody kind of loosen up the rules a little bit to operate against North Korea. And that's just human nature. So that is a problem that we're finding in that watching of the watchers.
So yeah, it reminds me a lot of this guy over here. This is Galileo, showing for those listening out there, my famous finger puppet. I'm known for my finger puppets. And here's Galileo with his telescope. But of course, back in 1632, when he came out with his second or fifth book or whatever, it was called The Dialogue on Two World Systems, which was meant to explicate the notion of a heliocentric universe versus the Earth-centered or geocentric universe that had prevailed for 2,000 years. And this was found to be in great contrast to what the Catholic Church was willing to accept. And they were the equivalent of the U.S. government on steroids. They were the most powerful entity on Earth at the time, and still of great power, as you know. And so it was partially their duty to, make sure that certain things were censored in order to keep the peace and keep. We look at it now as Galileo is this hero of science, and he is my hero, and he's incredible. He's the first scientist in many ways, invented the telescope, perfected the telescope. We'll talk about that in a bit. But the fact is, they needed to maintain secrecy in certain things, and so they actually allowed him to study the heliocentric model of the solar system, where the sun was at the center. But they said, you just can't teach it. So do us that solid. Don't teach it, because that would raise eyes of the public and start to maybe undermine their power. And so he said he agreed to that. And actually later on, 20 years went by and he thought, I'm famous enough. I got the ego and the swagger. He could do whatever he wants. And by that time, he said, actually, what teaching meant was you couldn't teach it in the natural vernacular of the people, which is Italian. But the original research was done in Latin. So his first book is called Sidereus Nuncius, which means starry messenger. And people were fine with that. Even though it promulgated the notion that the earth wasn't the center of the cosmos, as the Bible allegedly, according to some, maintained. So there are a lot of parallels there. And only when he published in Latin and Italian did he really get subject of the Inquisition. So it's really almost his fault in a certain way. And, that he didn't abide by those rules. But can you give tips to, those of us in science that are working at this interface? It's not clear to me, according to certain people, if I invent something that I have 2 patents, they've generated, less than the cost of a postage stamp nowadays, unfortunately for me and my kids' college tuition. But, but the point, Andy, is, at some point, if I did invent something, this fusion reactor I built right here, does that become the property of the government? I mean, at a certain point, if it has national security implications, or what are my rights and abilities as a scientist to maintain my own intellectual property?
It's a great question. There's two kind of parallel topics that we have to address simultaneously, right? The first is understanding how to predict the government's response to what they would consider to be a public threat. And a public threat does not always mean a security threat. Right? A public threat can be a change of social norms in a drastic period of time. COVID was a public threat, right? Even after it was confirmed that COVID was not like the super virus that they were afraid it was going to be, even after they knew it was most vital to protect the ultra vulnerable, even after that, it still posed a public panic threat, a public calm or ease threat, a public economic threat, right?
Scientific advances are often frightening as well as exciting. An example of this is Elon Musk's new Neuralink, a brain-computer interface designed to assist paralyzed patients in controlling technology with their thoughts. While this technology holds immense promise for restoring movement and communication, ethical concerns linger around safety, privacy, and the potential long-term effects. Despite the controversy, Neuralink is planning upcoming trials in more and more patients, aiming for high single digits by the end of the year. If successful, this could mark a significant step towards revolutionizing human-computer interaction. I love staying up to date on news, especially related to science, technology, and artificial intelligence. And with the rapid speed of today's news cycle, it's crucial to stay informed and trust where you're getting your information. I'm excited I found this story about Neuralink on Ground News. Ground News is a website and app that I use every day. It gathers articles from around 50,000 news sources all over the world in an unbiased way that can help you read between the lines of the standard mainstream media bias. It helps you break free of algorithms and echo chambers and filter bubbles. You can check them out at ground.news/Dr. Brian. Let me show you why I love Ground News. Right away in the Neuralink story, you can see that 47 news outlets have reported on the story. Of these 47 outlets, 35% of them lean to the left politically, 35% come from the center, and only 31% lean right. You can see the reliability of the outlets covering the story. This is unique. It also shows who owns the outlets reporting on the story. The majority, 32%, are from independent news outlets. Ground News also makes it easy to compare headlines to see how bias might influence the framing and shape our understanding of the issues. I found it hugely fascinating that the left tends to focus on the detailed technical issues and improvements, highlighting the long-term goals, while the center emphasizes Musk's intentions to give people superpowers. Surprisingly, the right-leaning media coverage underscores assurances made that the implant doesn't harm the brain and focuses more on the technology's potential benefits. You can't get this type of news analysis anywhere else. The news isn't going to report on itself, but Ground News does. One of my favorite features is to look at their blind spot feed, which allows you to see stories that are underreported by either side of the political spectrum. The blind spot feed has been incredibly helpful in seeing what each side focuses on and what they ignore. With Ground News, you get a deeper understanding of the complexity and nuance of different issues by seeing it from all different sides and identifying media narratives. I love Ground News so much I deleted the default news app on my iPhone, Apple News, and installed Ground News and their widget instead. And I can tell you Ground News is the perfect gift for family and friends. Especially in 2024, it's going to be a blowout, wildly polarized electoral season and aftermath. To get this, go to ground.news/Dr. Brian, to stay fully informed on breaking news and see through media bias. You'll become a smarter news consumer and subscribe to my link for 40% off unlimited access with their Vantage plan, the same plan I use. By subscribing, you're directly supporting an independent platform for news and supporting the show as well.
If you look at how the U.S. federal government and every federal government in the world, when you look at how they view their population as an organism, as a herd, if you will, right? As an economic engine. You have to keep that economic engine focused on what it's supposed to do. As soon as it gets distracted by something else, you suffer from two losses. One, you lose the productivity that you would have had they not been distracted. And then two, you run the risk of them hurting themselves, right? So imagine why do we put that lampshade on our dogs when our dogs have surgery or something? It's because you don't want them to hurt themselves. Bite open the stitches, lick open the stitches, lick off the bandage. So you put this hood on them to protect them from hurting themselves, in large part because the dog is ignorant of future consequences. Individual Americans are not ignorant of future causes. Society as a whole is ignorant of future causes. That's why we have mob mentality. That's why you have public panic, right? As soon as masses of people get together, it's energetics. People they have a shared consciousness.
Spiral,
and then they start making bad individual decisions in the favor of the public, the larger context, right? It's psychological. It's predictable. So the government has to protect against that. So oftentimes they restrict access to information, or like you saw in Galileo's case, they will grant private discovery, but not public discovery.
Hey there, I'm ashamed to admit that I've launched a PSYOP on you. You see, I've been trying for years now to get all the viewers and listeners to actually subscribe to my YouTube channel and podcast, but only about 50% of you are actually doing it. That's a worse track record than some government agencies achieve. It feels like my manipulation is not working, so now I'm asking you boldly and out in the open, please take a second to hit that subscribe button or follow the podcast in your audio player of choice. It really helps a lot and helps me get these great guests like Andrew Bustamante and many, many more. Let's go back deep undercover.
So to your point about what can a scientist do? A scientist who comes up with a patent that advances the economic engine, the economic organism, or can be used in a way to protect national security, which is why so much science happens in weapons research and military research first. Right? You can absolutely assume that you will own that patent. You will be the sole beneficiary of all the financial benefits that come from that patent, as long as you adhere to the context of the contract that the federal government sets up with you. You can't violate the terms of that contract because the federal government is concerned not only with the public disclosure of something that ruins their economic engine, but you also have to understand that if the public can learn something, so can our adversaries. Mm-hmm. So now your reactor that becomes public knowledge to the average Kentuckian is also public knowledge to the average Iranian, the average Chinese, the average Hong Kong, who can steal that patent and use it to improve their own country. And now we are now at risk. So now our economic engine is distracted and our adversary has gained an advantage because you chose to make your knowledge public. Now you are very much at risk of losing the privileges, not because they're trying to punish you, but because you violated the terms of the contract, just like Galileo violated the terms of the contract with the church.
Right, which he was well aware of. Okay, speaking of Galileo, and because you're called the Everyday Spy, it reminds me of Everyday Carry. You've heard of that, Andy? You've heard of Everyday Carry? Of course. I am assuming you have some sort of special skills like Liam Neeson that will allow you to open this gift that I have bestowed upon you here. This is for you. Dear. Do you have any Everyday Carry items? If not, I do, and stand by. Do you have a knife on you?
No, I will take your knife. A knife is actually not something that we everyday carry.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No, I did. I was able to open the gift without it.
So your fingers are like knives.
There we go. All right, so let's take a look here. Oh, I like this already.
Yeah.
So I am an Air Force Academy graduate and a proud aviator, but I love the sea.
Yes.
And the whole maritime element of this is quite beautiful.
Yes. I think you'll like what's inside. If we can open it. Is there a latch on it? Or is it just magnets?
It could just be magnets.
I think it's just...
There's a hinge for sure on the side, it looks like.
And there's no tape or anything. You just break it open. Yeah. There you go. Inside there.
Oh, no way.
You will find... Now, this isn't research grade. This is not going to be good for you, your wife and you to go out and...
Look at this, dude.
So this was what Galileo... It's effectively the same exact thing. So you can pull it out. You can extend it. It's not very good, high quality again, but it looks nice. But the reason I bring that up is because Galileo, our friend, he didn't invent the telescope, but he had heard about it from the Netherlands. But as you point out, technology doesn't abide by borders, right? The Netherlands guy, this guy Hans Lippershey, he invented it in 1601 or something like that. He sat on it for a couple of years, never thought, and the reason that he invented it was because he was, the Netherlands was very good at making glasses for optical reasons. And but he never, no one ever thought about taking the two lenses and putting them together and then looking up at the sky until Galileo did it. And then Galileo was able to scale up the size of the lens, the quality of the glass, the grinding. I mean, we take it for granted now. I mean, I got that, I won't tell you my sources because I want you to really treasure that, Eddie. But the point is, they called this device the spyglass because what it did is it removed the stealthy advantage that distance always provided. And the very first thing that Galileo did, like a good entrepreneur, is try to sell it to the Venetian government that he was abiding under at the time. And he had some patrons, and they did offer to buy it from him. They didn't give him much money, but they gave him a full tenured position, which is what all academics want, right? So he got full tenured track job, and he got a couple of hundred extra scooty per year or whatever. But the point is, this technology, it didn't abide by borders, exactly as you're saying. And oftentimes we see immediately made military, because you could see a ship at sea 3 days before you could see it in the lagoon itself. So it was incredible for advantage for the Venetian government, and that was before Italy was unified, et cetera. But the point is, we often think, as I just posed to you, this kind of paranoid question of, well, if the government steals my research, I'm studying the cosmos, they might steal some technology. But oftentimes it's gone the other way, where there's been military technology that then gets used for scientific purposes. Have you encountered that as well in your career, where like something that was invented for the military then spins off and becomes useful for the scientists, eggheads like me and my friends?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. You've seen it in multiple different ways. So AI is one of those examples. I know artificial intelligence is something that's taken the world by storm in the last, 3 to 5 years?
Yeah.
When I was still at CIA, we were using rudimentary forms of artificial intelligence.
Wow.
Right? And that's back in 2008, 2009, because we had smart algorithms that were aiding us in the contextualization of massive amounts of open source information. It wasn't what it is now. You couldn't go to OpenAI and ask a question and have it respond to you like that, right? But you could save hours or days or weeks of research by using the right Boolean term in the right engine, right? So that the whole funding mechanism that made it so that you and I can talk about AI and use it for free, that funding mechanism started with the federal government. And that's just one of multiple examples, right? Even things like dried food and pencils that were created for NASA and astronaut use now make our everyday life better, right? Combat boots, which used to be just only available to, combat soldiers. Now the 550 cord, the types of rubber, the types of tread, those are accessible for everyday people, from tactical use to farming use and beyond. So just like you're talking about here with the spyglass, a big part of what I'm trying to do with my company is to take the processes and the frameworks that we use at CIA to keep America safe by stealing secrets. Really, stealing secrets is nothing more than the art of getting people to disclose secrets. That's all it is. Well, there's no reason why you and I can't use the art of getting other people to disclose secrets in our business, in our academic life, in our social life, right? Why, if I go buy a car, the salesperson's trying to keep a secret. Well, if I can get the salesperson's secret, I can use that for my own benefit. There's nothing illegal about that, right? And there's actually a technique, there's a framework, there's a system to get people to disclose their secrets without knowing about it. That framework is called elicitation. So why not just use that? The thing is, there's an element of over classification that's very, very real in the federal government. You mentioned earlier, like, does the question of alien life meet the threshold of having to make it a national security secret? Maybe not. There are many, many things out there that do not meet the threshold of being a national security secret that are still classified. They're over-classified, and that is a massive problem in the intelligence infrastructure, because when in doubt, guess what your federal employees do? When in doubt, classify it. And then that's just a way of saying, we'll kick the can down the road and let some other team in the future review it and determine whether or not it should be declassified. Just 4 years ago was the 50th anniversary of JFK.
That's right.
For people that don't know, everything that's documented and classified in the intelligence world is by default classified 2x25, which means 2 terms of 25 years. So if you and I have a secret conversation with some Turkish person, doesn't matter what we talk about, the default 2x25. Why the hell is it then that after 2x25, we still couldn't release all the secrets about JFK?
That's right. Trump alleged that he would do it.
Right.
But he didn't.
Is it because there's something in there that is actually so secret it threatens national security? Or is it because some bureaucrat was like, I don't really want to be the one that makes the call on this, so I'm going to kick it down the road to the next person.
Right. Hopefully I'll be dead when that happens.
Right? Occam's razor dictates to us that it's more likely just a lazy administrator than it is an actual national security secret.
Right, cover up and whatnot. And then talk about what I call the conspiracy number, which is like how many people would have to maintain this. Let's do a Gedanken, a thought experiment for the listeners out there. Because I'm a skeptic. I'm not only a skeptic about aliens having crash landed in Roswell or wherever. I'm a skeptic about life existing elsewhere in the whole universe. That's a podcast for another day, or TED Talk for another day. But not to say it's impossible. I think it's eminently possible. But the question is, how likely is it? And that's Occam's razor has to be applied, as you say. But let's walk through it. Let's say there was spacecraft. This is James Webb Space Telescope, which is a successor to the Hubble Space Telescope, which is basically a KH-11 spy satellite turned the other direction, right? So, the newest successor to the Hubble Space Telescope, called the Nancy Roman Space Telescope, that is literally like a KH-11 that the DoD said, we don't have a use for it. You got eggheads want to use it. And they were like, yeah, we'll turn around. We'll look for dark energy, which is astounding to me, but it's another benefit. But let's walk through it. Let's say this thing crashed and these guys got out and little green men walked around. How many people and for how long would such a conspiracy entail? And conspiracies happen all the time, right?
Correct.
You and I conspired to have this meeting today, right? I mean, conspiracy just means breathing together, right? So the question is, how many people, how likely would it be, from your perspective, knowing the tools, the tactics, the training that you have and that you use in your company? Let's assess it. How likely is it, in sort of a Bayesian or statistical likelihood, that these things actually occurred?
Right. There's to really properly do this thought experiment justice, you have to also ask yourself, what's the baseline at the moment of the event, right? If a space vehicle crash lands in the middle of a suburban neighborhood, the probability of that secret being maintained more than 1 or 2 degrees is almost non-existent, because nobody in that neighborhood is familiar with keeping a secret, has proper communication channels, has behavioral practices or expectations that are formatted. So all of a sudden it's like 15 minutes later, the whole world knows about it. If the same vehicle crash lands in the middle of a secret military base in Montana, then the opposite is true. Now all of a sudden you can have reasonable confidence that it's going to be preserved for a long period of time, because everybody in the area of that vicinity is under sworn oath to keep things secret. They have a written record. They know how to communicate. They have a procedure for how to respond to such an event, right? They have, even the UCMJ is a legal structure that can incriminate them for disclosing what they've discovered. So the probabilities of the event happening in this thought experiment are significantly different depending on the baseline of the community in which it happened. So I want to throw that out there so that people understand, because to your point, training, structure, process, expectations, these are all things that feed into the longevity of a secret, which is why everything from CIA to DOD to NASA, they spend so much time vetting, training, and preparing their cadre to keep a secret, because they know that on the other side of the fence, there are adversaries, but there are also journalists and politicians and business executives and lobbyists who are all actively trying to steal those secrets. So you have to know how to keep a secret and spot a secret stealer in order to successfully maintain the confidentiality of an event.
And then they have to overlap over extended periods of time where, this guy drove out to get the skids, steer that picked up the spacecraft. He had to not tell his wife, and then she had to not tell their kids.
Yep.
And this had to go on for quite some time. Sticking with space and military themes. So what's it like to be a missileer? I mean, what does that really mean? Is it really like we see, there's 2 guys with keys inside of a bunker in Minot, North Dakota, or wherever you guys are? What is it really like to be a missileer?
So I will tell you right now, for anybody who's listening who is a missile officer, or for anyone who's the child or nephew or uncle of a missileer, every American owes a debt of gratitude to the men and women who sit underground every day,
24/7,
waiting for what we all hope will never happen. That is their career, right? You get to come to an office when you choose. I get to log into a computer when I want. Like, some people complain about their 2.5 weeks of vacation that they get, but nobody ever says no to that vacation. Missileers, the nuclear missile force, does not get to do that. They sit underground for sometimes up to 72 hours at a time, only sleeping for between 2 and 4 hours at a time, because they are constantly interrupted with what's called an emergency access message, an EAM, emergency alert message, EAM. And that EAM is just an exercise in what to do if a real nuclear missile strike occurs.
But do they know it's a secret? It's a test?
They don't. That's the thing. Like, in order to keep the cadre trained and on their toes, every 2 to 4 hours, a new EAM comes in. Sometimes they come in rapidly. Sometimes they come in slowly. They all come in encrypted. And I don't mean encrypted like your messenger is encrypted, where you read it plain text. Right. They actually get the raw encryption. EA32615W, whatever, right?
Some hex codes. Yeah.
And then they have to translate that through their machine, because the machine has the encryption key, not them. So they have to manually put it into their machine. Their machine then tells them a checklist to refer to. The checklist tells them what steps to take, and it's not steps like launch a missile. It's steps like turn this key, press this button, right? And this is what they do. This is their rote memorization. We were talking about the importance of training. This is what prevents a conscientious objector from ever finding their way into the missile force, because you don't know what you're doing. Right. You're just following the steps that are supposed to be followed until you hit enter at the end, and then the EAM turns off. And maybe you launched a missile, or maybe you didn't.
Maybe you don't.
You have no idea. But that's exactly what life is like. Do they have keys? They absolutely have keys. And they have cards, and they have They have qualification cards that they have to crack open with hidden codes inside. It's all very real, but it's a mind trip because they don't see the sun. They don't sleep for more than a few hours at a time. They live underground with one other person. And an underground bunker is not a comfortable place to live. It's cold. It smells bad. It's uncomfortable, right? And that's their life.
And the other thing is I'm curious about is we see in the Ukraine-Russia war that most of the missiles are not fixed in bases. They're actually in mobile platforms, which seems to me just like we spend $10 billion on a submarine. Isn't it better? Aren't these antiquated? Like, do we really need people underground, deprived of sunlight and not seeing their loved ones for weeks at a time?
So it's a great point. And I would say, yes, we do need it, because if you look at Ukraine, it takes tens of thousands of soldiers to be able to carry out a hot conflict with mobile missiles. It only takes a few hundred with ICBMs in stationary static locations to be able to deter massive attacks, right? The strategy that's used in nuclear weapons isn't an offensive strategy or a defensive strategy. Nuclear missiles are not there so that we can launch them. They are specifically there and specifically maintained so that we never have to launch them. They are a deterrent. It's just like people who have a guard dog at their house. Why do you have a guard dog at your house? Because you want to be attacked? No. Because you want that guard dog to rip somebody's jugular out on your front door? No. You have a guard dog so nobody will ever try to steal from your house. It's a deterrent. That's what the nuclear arsenal is. It's a deterrent.
And then having a different portfolio of options, from stealth bombers to, and things do evolve over the decades. We've gone from, when I was a kid, it was mostly bombers and so forth, and the stationary missiles, and now it's a whole spectrum. What is a hypersonic missile, and where does that fit into the portfolio of defense?
That's a great point. And it's funny because you talk about bombers and jet fighters. Like, as much as these things should be deterrents, they are actually tools of a hot conflict. So to answer your hypersonic missile question in a non-scientific form, because I'm not a scientist, right? A hypersonic missile is essentially a missile that moves at lower altitudes, at high speeds, that can also oftentimes change direction and change speed and change altitude, which is something that your conventional rockets and missiles can't do. So because of the speed and deployment effectiveness of a hypersonic missile, it's difficult for the defenses, for traditional defenses, to be able to prevent against an attack from a hypersonic missile. So if you like the specific doctrinal use of where a hypersonic missile is so scary, the reason people are so scared of them, because if you think about it, why is the layperson afraid of a hypersonic missile? Or I would argue the layperson is not afraid of a hypersonic missile, because they're like, it's just another missile. Like, I was actually walking on the UCSD campus, and I saw one of your buildings. And I don't know why, because I'm sick in the head, but I saw the building and I was like, a JDAM, a Joint Direct Attack Munition, would only knock out like 4% of that building, right? Like a well-placed modern day attack missile,
surgical,
would only take out like 4%, 7% of that entire infrastructure. And if it was actually wartime, the missile would hit, the damage would be done. The other 90% of the building would continue to function, and a support team would come in and fix the remaining 4 or 7% in a week. And we'd be right back at full operational utility, right? So even when we talk about missiles, they're not that damaging. They don't do a large amount of damage. Right. Hypersonic missiles are so scary because they can move at high speed, be deployed in moments with almost no ability to defend against them, and they can take out a specific target. For example, an aircraft carrier. So now a piece of machinery that takes a decade to build, that carries the war abroad, that is the platform for an entire airbase, can be brought down in a matter of minutes from one hypersonic missile. That's what makes it so dangerous and scary and effective compared to your conventional rockets and missiles, which can have to go through the air at a certain speed. They have to go through a certain trajectory, and all of our defenses are made to intercept that missile. Right? Where it would take a barrage of missiles, like you see in Israel, a barrage of missiles and rockets that all get shot down. Like, it's literally a Hail Mary. We hope one of these gets through. Right. With a hypersonic missile, one is all it takes. And if they really want to get the job done correctly, they'll launch 3 or 4, confuse all the systems. And now you have 2 hypersonic missiles that just 1-2 punch and guarantee the end of one of our 11 aircraft carriers.
Yeah. $10 billion, 4,000 people. It's
gone.
A city at sea.
Yep.
sticking on that theme, when as you look at it as an expert on various military conflicts, including just yesterday, I saw that Russia's sending some guided missile cruisers to Cuba to do some exercises there. There were some off the coast of Southern California, off the warning area out there last month doing exercises. It feels to me like we're back in the 60s. I mean, I wasn't alive in the 60s, but a lot of the stuff I heard from my parents, and like we went to bed at night and we didn't know if we'd wake up in the morning. It seems like we're closer than ever to that point, even than it was back then, because there's so many people involved with so many different actors, so many different motivations and tangled and entanglements. What do you make of the global security? Give me your 30,000 foot view as an expert. What is the kind of hot conflict that concerns you the most, that we hear safe, fat, dumb, and happy, in my case, in San Diego, that we're just oblivious about, but we should be concerned about?
So I think the world needs to realize, especially like you're saying, your typical fat, dumb, and happy American needs to understand that we are already in World War III. It's already happening. We all think that it's going to look like World War II. It's going to look like bombers and submarines and alerts where you climb under your desk like that. There's no rational reason to think that a war in 2024 would look anything like a war in the 1950s. No reason to think that at all. You have to expect that the war would evolve. So here's what happened. Syria, Libya, the conflicts that you saw in Yemen, these were the beginnings of what we call proxy war. Proxy war is the term that you want to think of when you think about World War III. And a proxy war is nothing more than an intrastate, like intramural means inside the state, a civil war, if you will. It's an intrastate war that's funded and exacerbated by external players. That's what happened in Syria. Internal war funded and exacerbated by China and Russia on one side and the United States on the other side. Yemen is the same way. An intrastate conflict, a civil war funded by Saudi Arabia on one side, Iran on the other side. It's the same thing that happened in Libya, right? And that is the model of the current age. Right now, where we sit today, there's 116 hot conflict zones in the world. The vast majority of them are proxy wars, where there's a first world or developing world on one side and a first world or developing world adversary on the other side, who are both funding internal conflict, whether that's in Colombia or whether that's in Sri Lanka or whether that's in various parts like Myanmar or Burma, happening all over the world. Those conflicts started in 2006, 2007, right? Basically, the last or traditional conflict was us invading Afghanistan. When you look at Russia and Ukraine, Russia made a misstep because they violated the proxy war approach only because they shared a border with Ukraine. So they chose to go into Ukraine. But then immediately after they invaded Ukraine, what did the United States do? Used Ukraine as a proxy. So the war in Ukraine isn't a war between Russia and Ukraine. It's a war between the West and Russia. And the thing that's so frustrating is that when Russia first invaded Ukraine, Putin said, this is not a war against the West, right? This is a war against Nazism or whatever else, which was total bullshit, totally failed bad propaganda. But where Putin was smart is he knew that he just had to bullshit for a few months, because after that, something would happen where he could tell the truth. And that's why within 3 months, when Ukraine was using American weapons to fight on Ukrainian soil, and when Ukraine was using British weapons and Poles were teaching them, now it became very much a Western effort to contain Russia. And then that's when Putin changed, what is this war? And he changed it to, this is a war against the West. Well, now this guy who was a liar is telling the truth. And that's hard. It's hard to be a Western person and look at the conflict in Ukraine and not be like, how Putin's got a point. Putin's telling the truth sometimes.
Right, there's a grain of truth, which makes it ambiguous.
Which makes it even worse, because now he can hide the lies even more effectively behind that grain of truth. And it's such a show because we all we may disagree with this element, but we can't deny that other fact.
Right.
And the same thing now has evolved in between Israel and Hamas. So the point I'm trying to make is just World War III is already happening. What we are feeling as we feel like it's coming closer to home, what we're actually feeling is the escalatory effect, the escalation of proxy wars. There are more than there were before. They are larger than they were before. More people are getting involved than they were before. And we see, just like when you watch a fuse on a bomb, you know it's getting closer and closer to blowing up the bomb. And the question is, are we gonna snuff the fuse, clip the fuse, or let it go all the way? And that's the real question, because we are continuing to see escalation that is absolutely worrisome.
What are some of these terms that we've heard about? Color revolution, false flag operation. Can you talk about those? What do those mean? What's the relevance of those?
Yeah, so a color revolution is, I'll start there because that lives more on the conspiratorial realm than in the real realm.
Okay, good.
Right? Are there certain elements that go into a color revolution? A color revolution is really the idea of an artificial revolution that's orchestrated by the government in some way. And there are multiple books out there by authors who have outlined what a color revolution, like the recipe and the process of a color revolution. The problem is that the recipe they outline is a recipe of ingredients that are always there, right? It's like saying my chocolate cake is a special chocolate cake because it uses flour, eggs, milk, and chocolate. Yeah, like that's
the level of it.
Yeah, right. But like that's essentially what a color revolution is. They say, oh, you need to have an unpopular incumbent, and you need to have a way of swaying the people, and you need to have a reason to say that the elections were rigged. Guess what? You have every time.
Right.
There's
always
have
that ambiguity.
You
right?
always have those ingredients. So you can't say that a color revolution is something that's orchestrated when the ingredients are always there. Instead, you have to understand there's a cultural element to it as well. And that's why you saw the Arab Spring take off. Not because somebody orchestrated it, but because culturally you had the intangibles that were at the right place and time. You had technology and a population base and a cultural motivator that brought everything to a head at the same time. So I just wanted to knock that out quickly, because the idea of a color revolution, while color revolutions happen, the idea that they are orchestrated by a central government is silly. They can be exacerbated by a government, right? Because somebody can always fund that defunct, tangential, marginal cause. And somebody can always throw them an extra $10 million and make them all of a sudden more relevant. But it's very hard for a government entity to create something out of nothing, to create this cause out of nowhere. It's easier to just go in and fund an existing cause, take a marginalized voice and fund it and make it louder. And that's what is really a traditional covert influence campaign. That's been used since the days of the ancient Egyptians, right? That's real. Color revolution is commercialized.
Okay.
Now that compared to a false flag operations are very real. They are strategically, doctrinally trained to intelligence officers and military officers. And a false flag operation is when you claim to be someone you aren't while executing an operation. So if I walk up to somebody who's a weapons smuggler from Syria, and I claim to be Canadian, and I treat them and promise them all these benefits that they'll get in Canada, and I promise them Canadian money and maple syrup, that's a false flag. I am not Canadian. They don't know that I'm not Canadian. They're cooperating with me, fully thinking they're cooperating with the Canadian representative. And then when the time comes that I get what I want, I fall away, I disappear from space. They go to the Canadian government and say, hey, what about our payment? And the Canadians are like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's a false flag. There are certain countries that execute false flag more effectively than others. And there are certain countries that use it more often than others. Tops of that list, the Israelis use false flags.
Really? I was going to ask you about that, because it seems to me that they could use it more, right, than they do. For example, I've heard, my friends from that are Lebanese, they're Christian friends, and they hate Hamas and Hezbollah as much as the Jews in Israel do, but they are competing against, a population that's providing schools, and Hezbollah does a lot of social services, as does Hamas has a non-military wing too. So don't you think they could be much more effective? And how do you react to October 7th in the light of them being at the first country that you listed?
Yeah, absolutely. So Israel and Mossad use false flags often and effectively, but the problem is they most often replicate Western partners. So they false flag as Americans. They false flag as Canadians. They false flag as British. Well, what happens when you're in the Middle East? Nobody trusts Americans, Canadians, or the British.
Right.
So you have to false flag as somebody else. So that's where it's hard. It's hard for Israelis to false flag as any Arab country because you have to speak Arabic, you have to understand the Quran. It's difficult, right? Inside the Middle East, you've got the Saudis and the Emiratis who are exceptional at false flagging as other Arab countries, false flagging as Pakistani or Omani or Bahraini, or, the list goes on, or each other, right? So very effective process there for false flagging. So could Israel use it more? Yes, except that they're so accustomed now. It's been 15 or 20 years of dominance by the West. They've perfected the art of mimicking the West, not mimicking Europe or someone else.
What's the best way to exploit an individual's vulnerabilities, liabilities, et cetera? Is it sex, or is it money, or something else?
It's interesting. Every individual is an amalgam of what we call four primary motivations, right? And those four primary motivations fall into an acronym called RICE, R-I-C-E. R stands for reward, I stands for ideology, C stands for coercion, E stands for ego. So you, me, and everybody else, anywhere else in the world, we are an amalgam of these four core motivations. At some times in our lives, we'll do anything for a reward. At other times in our lives, we'll do anything to stroke our ego. At other times in our lives, we won't do shit unless there's a gun pointed at our head, right? And that's how you see these what we call core motivations change over time. So when it comes to exploiting someone's vulnerability, or tapping into someone's motivation, right? Vulnerability and motivation, or rather manipulation, if you consider manipulating a vulnerability, manipulation and motivation are two sides of the same coin.
Yes.
So it's up to you which side of the coin you want to use. Once you know which side of the coin you want to use, it boils down to which of those four core motivators are most relevant in the life of the person that you're talking to at the time. So if you're talking to a 44-year-old adult male with two young kids, they'll be at a different place than a 44-year-old female with two young kids. And if you're talking to a single 27-year-old male who is straight, they will be in a very different place than a single 27-year-old male who is homosexual, right? So you have to understand and assess your target through the lens of those four motivations to understand, well, here's their top motivation, here's their bottom motivation. If I come at them with this, they will respond favorably. If I come at them with that, they may respond with hostility. Just as a quick rule of thumb, ideology is almost always the strongest of all the motivations. Really? Doesn't matter if you're 27 or 57, if you're Christian, a Christian-based motivator will get you to say yes. If you're 18 or if you're 68 and you believe in the American flag and American ideals, an American affirmation will get people to say yes. So there are certain things that kind of transcend age and life experience, and that's ideology. Similarly, the weakest and the least successful of all the motivators is coercion. Because once you coerce somebody once, they will never trust you again. And we've seen this happen ourselves in our own lives, and we've seen it happen in mistakes that we've made in the past. Once you hold a gun to someone's head, will you get them to do the thing they have to do right now? Yes. But after you get them to do that thing, they will never talk to you again.
And then ego, the last one.
Ego
playing into the
correct.
Psychological reward, right? Yeah.
Correct. And ego is really the second strongest of all of them. Right shortly on the heels of ideology is ego. And what's fascinating about ego is people, mainstream media makes you think that ego is the same thing as egotistical, but they're not. Exactly. Yeah. Egotism and egotistical people are people who are driven by their ego. And oftentimes that ego is an ego where they want to be seen as experts or special or standout, right?
Yes.
Where actual ego is nothing more than how you view yourself and promoting publicly how you view yourself. So Mother Teresa had an ego. Yeah. Her ego was self-sacrifice and patience and tolerance and giving to the poor. That was her ego. Everything she did in her life, all of her public behavior was based around that ego. No different than Donald Trump, who has an ego, and everything in his public performance is for that ego. The difference is Mother Teresa didn't have egotism where Donald Trump does.
Absolutely. It makes me think, I know that you are renowned and you command, very significant speaking fees and consulting fees, Fortune 10 companies, just the top of the top, justifiably so based on your many, just incredible accomplishments. But I'm thinking right now, I got to I'm already applying rice to raising my kids, right? So we're doing stuff. I'm just trying to we have a reward. I mean, who you cannot raise kids, tell me if I'm wrong, without bribing them. Yep. At some level, you have to bribe them, right? And And then you have to have some idealism. So we're Jewish, and sometimes my kids will, we're at the checkout line at the counter at some, kosher, at some regular supermarket gas station or whatever, and they want this thing and this garbage and total processed crap, and I said, it's not kosher. Oh, put it down. They're not going to touch it. Where if it was anything, it was plutonium, but it was kosher. They'd eat it, right? And then coercion is like, if I have to raise my voice at my kid to get her to go back to sleep, it's not going to work, right?
Yep.
You failed at that point, right? Yeah. And then lastly, appealing to their ego, their sense of self, and what this really means. And it really did make me think that maybe Time Magazine might have made a mistake. They selected this guy to be their person of the century, the first and only person of the century so far in the 20th century. But really, Freud had a much bigger impact in terms of the skills and the day-to-day life than E equals MC squared, which, someone would have come up with that anyway. I mean, I'm not dissing Einstein. Talk about the kind of traits and, when you meet somebody that that they're cut out to be an intelligence officer, spy, or, something like that. What kind of common traits do they have, and what kind of things can you teach them? I'm always concerned, like, can I teach someone to be a good physicist, or are they born with it? What's your impression? Can you teach someone to be a successful, in your world?
Yeah, so I would say that in the intelligence world, there's two factors at play. There's, of course, the individual's capacity, their capacity for learning. But there's something called the teachability index. And the teachability index combines someone's capability with their willingness. So if you've got someone highly capable and highly willing, you can teach them very quickly. If you have someone highly willing with a low capability, you can teach them, but it takes longer. So there's always this element of time that goes into it, right? So I stand and I've built a business around proving that anyone can learn intelligence skills. It's just a matter of the teachability index and how long it takes for them to master the skill. Some people with high willingness and high capability can go very quickly. Some people with low willingness, and again, willingness doesn't mean I'm interested. Willingness means I'm willing to do the work to learn the skill. Someone might be interested all day long, but they work an 18-hour workday.
Right.
They just don't have the time to commit to the capability. So CIA has learned very effectively how to find people who have high willingness and high capability. And then on top of that, they've layered a very structured curriculum that's based in human psychology, so that when they take that highly willing, highly capable person and they bring it into their engine of training, they know that they can create a weapon in a specific period of time. And that time is classified, but it sits between 3 and 8 months, somewhere in that range, right? So they know with high confidence that 8 out of 10 of the right hires, when brought through the engine and driven through the process, they will the widget out the other end will be a high-performing intelligence tool. The same thing can be true for any hiring division. One of the reasons that I do consult for Fortune 10 companies is because one of their biggest problems is hiring, because the wrong hire costs money, firing costs money, the right hire can yield immediate benefits, but then they want to learn how to prepare that person for future benefits.
Leverage.
How do you know when someone you've hired is at the point where they should be promoted, when they've been promoted too fast, or when they need to be promoted faster, right? Because for a company, having a good person in the wrong position for 1 year can be the difference of millions of dollars.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they are always looking for, how do we hire better? A big part of how you hire better is just understanding the teachability index and understanding some sub-processes inside the teachability index, like personality traits, like temperaments, like high-performance team building. Understanding a few of those pieces and putting them together in the right order, all of a sudden you're making more money, wasting less time, and hiring fewer people. So for a professor, the same thing can be true, right? I would argue that something as simple as an assessment on the front end of any student applying to work with you, a simple automated 15 or 30-minute assessment is going to expedite your success rate and reduce your wasted time probably by 20% in both directions.
Yeah.
Meaning you have a 40% improvement net. However, we have to keep in mind the university system is also a revenue generating engine. You need failure. You need certain people to pay to fail in order to make up for the difference. and keep the costs lower for the people who pay and succeed.
Yeah, and I see that a lot. And actually, as you're speaking, it reminds me a lot of, like athletics. When you see somebody, who has latent raw ability. I mean, most 18-year-olds that are healthy, whatever, they could potentially, be useful, but are they coachable?
Right.
That's a question that a golf coach, tennis coach, football coach, they'll want to know. Are they they're not coachable. They're useless to you, right? In the organization. Talking about your it seems to me like it must be very challenging because you have to not only kind of abide by the corporate, all sorts of the protocols in the corporate world, but you're probably under some NDAs. You must be under some constraints from the government side. So how do you balance that as an entrepreneur to minimize, the risk downstream to your clients, but also to give them maximum benefit?
So we are under a lifetime secrecy agreement. Everybody who comes from CIA is under a lifetime secrecy agreement. What people don't understand is that the lifetime secrecy agreement is, because it's for life, it's actually very narrow because we're still American citizens. We still have all the rights and privileges of an American citizen, the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, freedom of movement. We still have all of those, right? So they have to create a contract, a lifetime secrecy contract that's extremely narrow so that it can be justifiable in a court. So our lifetime secrecy agreement applies to sources and methods of active intelligence collection as related to our operational history. Outside of that, it's outside of it's outside of our NDA, outside of our secrecy agreement. So what that means is it's very difficult for me to talk about my operational history, what I did, my credentials, where I traveled to, the covers that I used. It's hard for me to talk about those things. To talk about those things, I have to write them down, send them to CIA. CIA has to review them. They'll come back with redactions and suggestions. I have to change it again. I've had a book in the making now for almost 2 years because of this requirement. But for me to come out and talk about, here's my workout routine, here's how I keep myself safe, here's the way that CIA taught me to tie my shoes, and here was my breakfast when I was at the farm, those things they're outside of sources and methods.
Right.
What shocks me, the whole reason I have a business, the whole reason I can actually sit here and be one of the first millionaires in my family name, which is an incredible feeling. It's incredible feelings, right? Is not because I'm disclosing national security secrets.
Yeah, I hope not.
It's because I'm disclosing things that were never intended to be kept secret, but never made it into the public light because previous officers before me overclassified, right?
Because that's a safe thing to do.
Because it's a safe thing to do.
No one gets fired for, hiring McKinsey, right?
And nobody wants to go to jail.
Right.
And what ends up happening is the pre-9/11 CIA, which is the majority of retirees now, they grew up in a world where they were trained and indoctrinated to believe this is secret and you can never tell anyone. Post 9/11, we were taught the power of disclosure, right? If you keep a secret too secret, you run the risk of having another tower come down. So you have to find what's truly a secret and share enough to prevent disaster. That's our whole mentality. So when I left CIA, my mentality was protect secrets that are worth protecting and share everything else. So as soon as I looked at my own operational history, I was like, well, shit, man, I can teach people how I protect my family. I can teach people how I get ahead in the workplace. I can teach people how I outsmart my boss. I can teach people how to charge more money for the same product. I can teach these skills because they're based in psychology. They came from CIA. CIA uses them, but they were drafted by some, psychologist PhD student. Like I can do this without having to worry about going to Guantanamo Bay.
I'd come and visit you, Andy. Let's do some, what do they call that? Red team, blue team exercise. Okay. So, Andy, thank you. I've given you a telescope. I gave you a meteorite, some other swag. Gave you some spyglass. I want to also give you some crypto because I'm so glad that you came down here. I want to reimburse, your rental car. So here's some crypto, Andy. What are you going to do with that?
So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find a computer that's not on a network before I plug this in. It's a USB. So I don't know what's on this thing. Right. So if I plug this into a computer, I've got to consider that computer compromised. So that's the first thing I would do. And because it's coming from you, I trust you enough to trust that there's probably not an intentional virus on this. It's probably not an intentional malware, but I don't know what your security practices were for acquiring this USB. So I've got to put that extra effort in there. So that is what I will do because it came from you. I'm telling you right now that if somebody on the street or some fan came up to me in a coffee shop and said, this is for you, I would throw it away right away. But I will also ask you, if this is truly crypto, what is the crypto coin that you chose and why?
Okay, so that's actually data from the Webb telescope, which I don't think you're going to want to analyze. But you would have to go through a PhD program with me, which I invite you to do. So that was just a joke. Give it back, Andy. I want this back. Someone in my because we'll get to the end. We'll take questions from my audience, but they said make sure you sweep your office for bugs after Andy leaves. I don't believe that, but so. Getting back to like my life as a professor, right now, I have been to Moscow. I've spoken there, and there were protocols. I took a different laptop it wasn't my daily driver. It wasn't a burner. I mean, it's pretty expensive on a public professor's salary to do. I get a burner laptop, so I don't really have that. But talk about other things like VPNs. Do you use them? Do you use Alexa? Do you use these Facebook shades that I opened? The Meta glasses that I asked. Who is Andy Bustamante? And it can take video. These are great things. It has a little light, so it knows when you're recording. Hey Meta, take a video. So now, hey Meta, take a video.
To continue, make sure.
Okay, so it's gonna go through. So it takes a 1 minute video. You can do anything. I've walked through protests with these on. I've taken videos.
Wow.
Also with my kids, just hanging out, because you really get that first person perspective. Would you use these things? I mean, what protocols would you take or precautions would you take for using things like Alexa or Facebook or Siri or these shades or VPNs, etc.? What do you use personally?
It's a bigger question than I think most people realize.
Yeah.
So let me start by teaching you what the CIA teaches us. There's a continuum called the security continuum. On one end of that continuum is security, right? On the other end of that continuum is convenience. And then in the middle is, imagine a wire with a bead on it, right? The more you push that bead towards secure, the more it pushes away from convenient. So for anybody who's ever had their wife lock them out of the house, you know what it's like to be very secure and very inconvenient. Well, similarly, the closer you go to convenience, the further you are from security. So when you talk about glasses or the Internet of Things is really what we're talking about, right? The Internet of Things, the smartwatches, the glasses that are smart, anything that Bluetooths into your phone, whether that's your car or whether that's your earpods.
I just bought a light, like just a color controlled light for the podcast, and it's like, what's your Wi-Fi password? And it's like, you download this app from China. I'm like, why am I doing that? Like for the $20 light, forget about it.
Well, the thing is, you're doing it because you can now just press a button on your phone,
set up the whole studio,
and the whole studio's on. And that convenience comes at a cost of security. So everything lands on that spectrum. So what I would say is this: if you are somebody who is trying to live a secure life, you need to make a series of decisions that are very intentional that make your life less convenient. And you need to accept the lack of convenience. And plenty of people do that. Remember when our grandparents used to put money under their mattress? Very inconvenient, but very, very secure, right? Or like my grandmother, who used to lock the door with the deadbolt, lock the door with a switch, and then stick a rubber wedge under the door too, right? Why did she learn to do that? Because her money was under her mattress.
A grandson that would be in the CIA.
But that's the world they lived in. Right. We have been cultivated by a different world, and frankly, our children have been cultivated by a different world even still.
Yeah.
So most people under the age of 21 do not understand the risk of their phone. Even the people who are listening right now who are 23 and 25 and they're like, I understand the security implications of my phone. No, you do not. You do not. You do not understand the implications that exist from your call records that Verizon sells to the federal government and Verizon also sells to the Chinese. You do not understand the implications of your Google Maps or your Apple Maps or your Waze maps that are recorded and saved and turned into avatar data that's then used for advertising purposes. You don't understand the term ad tech. I would be shocked if the average person actually knows what the term ad tech is and understands how ad tech uses geographical fences to be able to identify IP and ISMI data so that they can create tailored experiences based on where you're standing. People do not understand the implications of just their one smartphone.
I've had an incredible experience where my copy editor for my first book, Allegra Houston, shout out to Allegra, the best copywriter in the world, copy editor. And she wrote a book herself, and she was my editor. She asked me to read it. I was honored. And so I took a picture of it, and then and then like a few minutes later, I got an ad on Amazon to buy that very book. And I'm like, I didn't authorize this,
Yeah.
to use access to my photos. It wasn't like on Facebook. It was like on my photos. So yeah, no, people I think have almost no idea. But should you assume everything is fair game then? Then they basically, do we have the right to privacy, or does past guest David Brin, who wrote the book Transparent Society, kind of advocates no, we should just be radically candid and tell everything to everybody, not expect secrets, but also demand that of the government as well.
So it's, again, this is a double-edged sword. If you want to live the most secure life possible, you need to understand you have no right to privacy. You don't. You have no right to privacy because you are giving that right away. When you log in to Google, you give the right away. When you let Apple take your face and use it to unlock your phone, you give that right away. You have a federal right to remain private, and the federal government will protect that right. They will not violate the federal law to invade upon your privacy because they don't have to. They can follow corporate law and buy all the data they want about you from Google or Amazon or Apple or Facebook.
And social graph, yeah.
And that's how they work, right? Remember how we were saying earlier that your patents are safe when the federal government used them for national security and military reasons? That's what they do. They use your tax dollars to buy your private data from companies that you give permission to collect your private data. Nothing in this world is free. Every free app comes with a cost, but the cost is a violation to your privacy. So if you want to be the most secure person possible, you need to do two things simultaneously. One, recognize that nothing is private. You have no right or expectation to privacy because everything about the world around you that is convenient is there because it is being paid for with your privacy. And then the second thing you need to do is start putting practices in place that stop the flow of new private data. For example, data brokers are constantly looking for new private data. Today, you are a certain age, 52.
That's right.
Tomorrow,
Did your homework.
Tomorrow you will be a day older. You will have created all this new data between today and tomorrow. You'll create a new podcast episode. You'll drive somewhere new. You'll buy something new. You'll talk to someone new. You'll post something new. You've just created whatever that is, 58 megabytes of new information. That new information is what they now call the newest natural resource, right? What you create and what I create every day is like gold or oil or silver. It's a natural resource that somebody else can take, refine, sell, and make money off of. So if you want to maximize your security, accept that you have no privacy now, and then put things in place that stop people from getting tomorrow's natural resources from you. That means use VPNs, use block data brokers, stop giving permissions away on your phone. Buy a second phone. I'm a huge fan of people having two phones. One phone that they use for personal events, one phone that they use for non-personal. And the non-personal, you have a separate account that you log into. Like if I use Android.
Heathen. Sponsored by Apple. Just kidding. I wish. Tim, look me up.
Create a Google account that's just for your secondary phone. We call it at CIA, we call that a misattributable phone. It means it can still be attributed to something,
Right.
but it can't be attributed to you because my personal phone, which I use with my wife and my children and everything else, exists on this side of the table, where the misattributable phone exists on this side of the table. Fun fact. Thanks to ad tech, those two phones, if they're literally on the same table at the same time,
they can communicate. Is there anything special about Android in all seriousness compared to Apple? I mean,
for me, it's philosophical.
Okay.
Apple promises that they protect your data.
Right.
They sell it.
Privacy is a human right.
Yeah. So Apple false advertises about what they do with your data, and then they choose political causes to demonstrate the promise that's not real. Like they will protect terrorists who are using Apple phones by preventing the FBI from getting access to the phone.
Right.
And they'll do that publicly because they want to advocate that they're protecting your privacy, when in fact they're still selling your data in the back end.
Yeah, and they even do it when somebody loses something with two-factor authentication. Someone can just swap in a SIM card, as I understand it, to an old phone, and then it's bricked basically for the user. Even if you have access to, if you lose access to the two-factor phone, and they advertise that, like you said, I never thought of it. It's actually a selling point because they get all this attention. Look how mean Apple is, but then it's like we're so private. We won't disclose the San Bernardino's, shooters, mass murderers, fingerprint because that would violate our core tenets. And immediately you're saying there.
And it's not just me that stands on this hill of hating Apple. There's a long line of FBI, NSA, CIA, like true protectors of American freedom. are saying it's one thing to be an American company and protect the rights and information of American citizens. It's a completely separate thing to be blinded to the fact that you are protecting adversaries who are trying to do damage and hurt American citizens, right? You want to stand on a high ground of privacy and protecting data? That's great. That's fine. Don't do it selectively. If you're going to say you protect people's data, don't sell it to data brokers. Take the loss of revenue that comes from truly protecting data. You want to keep it from FBI? That's fine. Also keep it from Deloitte. Also keep it from Huawei. Also keep it from Brazilian companies. Don't sell it to them, but reject it for FBI.
Hey there, sorry to break my deep cover one more time, but I have a special PSYOP just for you. It's an assignment to join my Monday Magic mailing list. And when you do, you'll be entered in a competition to win one of these genuine pieces of space dust. It's not a bug. It won't track you wherever you go, unlike your phone. But if you haven't already, go to briankeating.com/list and join. And if you have a .edu email address, go to briankeating.com/edu to enter. Now, back deep undercover once more.
Strange question for you. So imagine, I tell you that my colleagues upstairs have, discovered an exoplanet and there's intelligence on that exoplanet. What kind of, tools, techniques, leverage would you bring to the fight, to understand now for peaceful purposes, but to understand what's going on, gathering intelligence on another world? What kind of skills that you or your company could develop might be useful in such a situation? Think about language or, culture, all sorts of weird things. Right?
There's so many cool things. So first of all, let me just tell you that if you ever identify life on an exoplanet, please call me.
I will.
Next time you go to Antarctica, call me, right? If there's an adventure to be had, call me. I will find a way to bring value to the adventure.
You got it,
right?
brother. Yep.
But here's what I would say, right? When you think about any living life form, there's a survival instinct, always. The question is, what are the threat and non-threat indicators as viewed through the lens of that life form? So whether you're talking about a dolphin, a monkey, or a human being, right? We all have threat, non-threat, indices in our brains, and then we all, through our own experience and through our worldview, we have an idea of what fits into the threat and non-threat category. Oftentimes, all that it takes in order to have a peaceful exchange with something unknown is understanding their point of view, their perspective of threat and non-threat, and then presenting yourself as a non-threat. It sounds basic, it sounds simple, but that's the foundation of most mistakes that have ever happened between the human race and when the human race engages with animal kingdom, or when civilized human race engages with aboriginal human race.
Right.
We just mistake.
Right. Is it dangerous to we've been broadcasting our existence unknowingly for 75 years. Are you worried about that?
I wouldn't say that I'm worried about it because, for example, broadcasting our existence, right? We're putting out radio waves, which are one of the most basic forms of communication out there. They're non-aggressive, right? So unless we happen to come across some sort of intelligence or life force out there that is threatened by radio waves, which may exist. Like, here's Little Green Man is a figment of our American human brain.
Hollywood and
Radio waves are energy. Just like gamma rays can hurt us, radio waves might be able to hurt an alien species. Well, if we're launching radio waves that are the equivalent of someone launching gamma rays at us, a fight may be coming, right? But the odds are relatively low based on what we understand about science.
Fun fact, sorry to interrupt you, but there's the first detection of what are called gamma ray bursts, or these incredibly energetic, phenomena in space, were actually picked up by a spy satellite that was trying to detect the impact of nuclear tests on Earth. So that's another blend between science and technology. But sorry to talk about.
No, but I mean, what you're getting at is we're saying very similar things, right? I'm not worried about us trying to tell the world or tell the universe, tell the galaxy that we're here, because we're doing it in what's as passive a way as our science allows us to know, right? If we could flash a light that was big enough, we would. All we're really doing right now is just banging a drum. And I mean, if you've ever heard a drum in the distance, I had the opportunity to do a show with History Channel, live documentary effort, exploring the unknown and strange phenomenon with the History Channel. It's called Beyond Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh yeah, we got to add that in the background here.
And we've spent time on Native American reserves engaging with Native American hosts who are explaining to us about their experiences with the unknown, unique phenomenon, the unexplained, UFOs, UAPs, right? because they look at it through a lens that's very traditional to them. And in the distance, you hear drums. Oftentimes, you hear drums. Whether it's a drum circle practicing, or whether it's just a family doing something out by like a fire pit, whatever else it might be, there are drums. When you hear drums in the distance, it's up to your interpretation. If it's a threatening drum, if it's an inviting drum, if it's a war drum, if it's a dance drum, if it's a celebration, if it's a mourning, you don't know. All you hear is a beat.
Right.
That's essentially what we're doing for the universe, as I see it, with most of our efforts to try to engage the unknown. We're sending out a drum, but we don't know how that drum is being interpreted.
Yeah, we can't be on the backside of the communications channel. Speaking of communications, so Donald Trump, speaking early June 2024, Donald Trump was just convicted of, paying off some porn star for some illicit activities that he used campaign. Anyway, there are other cases pending, including classified documents, which has been an accusation level against President Biden. But just at Trump, since it's the only active investigation, it seems to me he could just say, he's being investigated because he claimed that he had these documents with him. But it always seemed kind of a little bit superfluous to me to say, well, he has these documents in his house at the time of the interview or whatever, because he could just have memorized them, right? So what is the physical document versus me exposing, some national secret, the nuclear football? I don't even know what there is, but just the point is, he could have, been some idiot savant. Maybe he's not an idiot. I don't want to. Sorry, Donald, if you're watching, which I doubt you are. But the point is, you have this knowledge, but then there's stuff that's written down. It seems like, oh, you wrote this down, and in the case of Biden, stored it in a garage, near Hunter Biden's, revolver or whatever, and then Trump with Mar-a-Lago in the toilet, near the golden toilet. Why is there a difference? If he could have just things that you by definition can't tell me. So what's the difference if you have some document that also has that information that you also can't share with me?
It's a great question. It's actually something that the intelligence community is struggling with. The intelligence community and the judicial branch as a whole is struggling with this question, especially like we were talking about with the advance of technology. So let's just imagine that one of the sheets of paper you have right now is a classified document. In order for it to fit the definition of a classified document, two things must occur. First, it must contain information that fits the criteria to be defined as the classification, meaning grave damage to national security, significant damage to national security, or possible damage to national security. That's basically what defines your secret, your top secret, and your confidential. So the information must be confirmed to fit into one of those three categories. Then on top of that, the document itself must have a header and a footer that say, this is classified for this period of time at this level and authorized according to this code. If those two things aren't present on that piece of paper, it's not classified, right? If there's no information in there that is of grave, significant, or possible damage to national security, even if it has a header and a footer, it does not legally qualify as being classified. It's enough to get a judge to look at it and make the call, but the judge will most likely say this isn't classified information. This is someone's name and shoe size. It's not classified, right? Now, assuming it is classified, gets to the heart of your question. If you read it, you now have that classified information in your head, but there's no classification requirement to you based on that document not to disclose what's in your head. It takes a different set of laws to protect what's in your head, some other commitment that you have to make. Well, what happens if we take a picture of that document? What happens if we take a picture of that document and then crop out the header and the footer? What if we take a picture of that document and then black out the classification, like the actual parts that are classified? Are these things still part of classification? And then similarly, if you photocopy that document, cut off the header, cut off the footer, and black out the centerpiece and take it back to your home, is it classified? This is where we are right now, and people don't have an answer to that.
It seems so overbroad. There's so many, it's like it's like pollution. Once you create it, you can't really undo it, but we're producing so much more information. As you said, like tonight I'll produce 58 megabytes of data, right? And none of it's classified except for what my wife wants to do on our date night. But the point is, it seems like we're just gone crazy, and for the point of CYA, not CIA, but CYA, it's just like nobody wants to be the one who gave away the secret that led to some event occurring or taking place.
And it only gets more complicated when you start talking about who.
Yeah.
Because now you're talking about the commander-in-chief. The president of the United States is the commander-in-chief.
Right.
The former president of the United States is the former commander-in-chief.
Right.
basically that person says anything and it's of possible damage to the United States national security. So every word that comes out of their mouth could be considered classified. Every text message, every tweet, every whatever, right? Every side comment they have with their executive assistant could be of national security concern because Iranians would love to have it. The Chinese would love to know what Donald Trump's allergic to. Like, they would love that information. So it becomes potentially damaging to national security. So now the question is if the president has classified documents in their living room, like all presidents do, are they showing a lapse in security judgment in doing so? Or is there some flaw in the security expectations of what should exist inside their home? Should the president have what's known as a SCIF, a secure compartmented information facility? Should they have a SCIF in their home to protect that data? Should they have a safe in their home to protect their data? Those are questions the media is not asking. Instead, the media is getting all wound up about Biden and Trump having classified documents in their house. Well, guess what? So did all the Bushes. So did the Clintons. So do the Obamas. Like, I guarantee you, Barack Obama, who's making movies and speaking in colleges
Netflix,
right now,
yeah.
has fucking documents in his house that have classification headers that he probably forgot are even there.
Right. And what do you do with them? You just throw them out, right?
It's the former commander-in-chief. Like, that is their toilet paper.
In his mind, all right? I mean, that's
mind,
the whole point. It's not like they give him that Men in Black, that you guys have the access to, that you promised me you'd show me later. Talk about what you do. You have a limited time. Let's say my dean, she's super wealthy. She hires you. Your consultant, she's an executive. She oversees budgets, $20-30 million a year, a couple hundred people, faculty down to undergraduates she's responsible for. How do you triage? She's a brilliant person. What's the first thing you do? Situational awareness, vulnerability, threat assessment. You've got, a week to do it. The university's paying you. What do you do as part of Everyday Spy, just in that kind of, CEO, basic CEO type functionality? How would you triage? What are the most important things for such a person to be aware of so that they can be, assuming they're trainable, coachable, et cetera?
So honestly, and you may not like the answer to this, most people don't like the answer to this. The first thing that I would do is just sit and have a personal interview with the dean. That's all I would do. The interview would have specific questions that I'm asking, but the purpose of the interview is not to ask the questions. The purpose of the interview is to see the response to the questions, the physiological response, the verbal response, the stress response. It's not about the content, it's about the context. And then from the context, I would have the majority of what I need to know to actually go to the board of trustees or the board of advisors, who are the boss to the dean. And then I would basically tell them what I assess. And here's the reason that we do it that way, is because everybody works for somebody. And when my company is hired, my company is never hired because everybody's satisfied. My company is hired because somebody is uncertain.
There's a fire, yeah.
So when I go to that board of advisors and I say, I had a great conversation with your dean, but here's what I see. I see somebody who's overworked. I see somebody who's a little bit lax in maintaining their security protocols. I see somebody who didn't lock their screen whenever I was talking to them and took phone calls and left their phone unlocked, and somebody who, whatever else. I saw 5 different books on their table written by these people. I saw these theses that were, from these students. Like, clearly this is a person who gives me these concerns. What's going to happen is when I voice those concerns objectively, the people in that advisory board, they're going to say, that's the same thing we thought. That's the same thing we thought. We thought she was overworked too. We thought she was missing this too. We thought she was doing this too. And we didn't know what to do. We were debating whether we should fire her, whether we should put her on sabbatical, whether we should replace her, whether we should put like an executive assistant who was going to give us an inside like spy on the dean, right? We were looking at all these different options, but you just figured these things out in a 2-hour interview or a 1-hour interview. What happens is whenever you present a problem that somebody already knows is there and you present it in a way that validates what they suspected, that's 80% of that's 80% of the challenge, because now they don't feel alone.
They're not threatened. Yeah.
They're not threatened. Bingo. So now they come and they say, well, what would you recommend we do next?
Perceptive.
And then we can outline something. And what's beautiful about it is that when you can outline a solution, you can become a mediator, essentially a bridge between the dean, who also feels all the same problems, also feels overworked, also knows they're not being as secure as they could be, also knows they're making a mistake, and they're self-conscious for those mistakes. But the dean or the CEO or the CFO or the COO can't go to the board of advisors or directors and say, hey guys, I'm overworked and I'm skipping some security protocols to try to make things work to meet our quarterly, financial goals. You can't say that. Like, they are not in a position to say that. But my company, as the outside advisor coming in, can. And when I can say it and validate the board of directors and simultaneously validate the executives in the C-suite, now everybody is on board with finding a solution, right? And then that's when the real work starts.
And how much technology can your company bring to bear? Can it bring in lie detectors, polygraphs, laser window reading, scanners, and bugs? And what technology can you deliver, and what's still beyond declassification, perhaps?
So most people would be shocked to know what we could bring to the table, because our network is a network of all former intelligence officers. So as an example, we're working an ultra high net worth case right now. Ultra high net worth are people who are worth a certain amount of money. Usually it's in excess of $50 million net worth. So we have an ultra high net worth client that we're working right now on what is essentially a geolocation project. A geolocation project to find a person of interest, to get that person of interest to take a specific action that benefits the ultra high net worth's personal and professional goals. In order to do that, we're using all kinds of technology that most people don't realize exists in the commercial sector. The reason that we get access to that technology is because we have Navy SEAL technician friends. We have FBI technician friends. We have FBI field agent friends. We have active duty police friends. Like, we have a network that can reach into all of these different places commercially to solve a problem discreetly for a high net worth individual who's got real revenue objectives on the other end, right? Your average layperson can't do that. And the reason that is so special to the right kind of person is because there's no amount of money that is too expensive when you're trying to be discreet. And there's also no amount of money that you won't spend when you know the money that you're going to spend will generate more money in return or in ROI. That's the kind of sweet spot where EverydaySpy lives when it comes to supporting corporate clients.
How do you maintain, the confidentiality? Is it just that you are running things through, again, from the business to the CIA, check that for, you mentioned the challenges with your book, but, on a day-to-day basis, do you have to call Langley every time you want to take on a new client, or is it just a broad portfolio when you have some new technology or skill or field asset or whatever, then you have to call them in? Do you have a check? How do you go through the process of vetting to, people in the CIA, what's kosher or not for you to apply?
Yeah, well, that's the magic of of our lifetime secrecy agreement, because it's so narrow in scope, because it only applies to sources and methods from our operational history. It has nothing to do with what we do in the future. So anything I do now is outside of the context of CIA, unless what I am doing is trying to publish something that I did operationally when I was at CIA. So we sit at a very beneficial intersection where I don't have to tell CIA anything that I'm doing right now. I could work with the Chinese and I wouldn't have to tell them, right? Because it's current. I might be taking on other risks, right, but there's no mandate that says I have to.
I see.
But if I ever want their help with something, like if I'm ever working with somebody who might be being targeted by a Russian, I always have the ability to reach into CIA and say, hey guys, I have a case that you might be interested in.
I see.
So we actually get this dual benefit, which is funny because when you're part of the federal government, you get almost no benefits. But then once you leave the federal government, you have multiple benefits.
So when I interviewed Hazard Lee, who wrote this book, The Art of Clear Thinking, about a year or so ago, I asked him the following question: what's the biggest misconception that people have either about your life as a CIA officer and your entrepreneurial career? For him, it was as a former stealth fighter pilot and current fighter pilot in the reserves. And, he was like, basically that, hand-eye coordination. Like, you guys just have awesome hand-eye coordination. And he was like, if I have to rely on my hand-eye coordination, I've effed up somewhere. If you're at the last minute, split second, imagine you're landing in the Southwest today, coming in, and the pilot has to have really good he messed up miles and miles, and she messed up. What's the biggest misconception that people get about your career?
So the biggest misconception that people have about CIA officers is that we are somehow super smart. We're not. I mean, we are trained, we are disciplined, we are structured, but we are not super smart. When you have enough structure and discipline, you can get away with a whole hell of a lot more than just by being smart. any smart person out there knows the problem with being smart is that you're easily distracted. Because if something isn't good enough to keep your current attention, you will move on to the next thing. For that reason, CIA hires people that we joke are too dumb to quit. Meaning, you bring in somebody, you teach them a structure, you teach them a framework, and you teach them that all they have to do is this simple structure and this simple framework over and over again, and they will have success. Well, guess what that does to a not so smart person? It gives us exactly what we need to have high confidence in our success. So then we just do it over and over and over again, and that's how we have success.
Awesome. Okay, so now in the last few minutes, if you indulge me a few more minutes of time, it's just so fascinating and fun. Can't resist. It's how often do I get this chance? So I've got a lot of questions from my audience, and I'd like to ask. And you can get in touch with Andrew at his on Twitter. He's EverydaySpy. He's got a YouTube channel, Everyday-Spy, and we'll put all the links down below. So first question came from Gonzalo Chavez, who says, on Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, they've analyzed Chris Bledsoe's brainwaves as orbs were being manifested. Have you, Andy, ever considered reproducing that study in Mexico with an individual named Juanito Juan? He not only manifests orbs, he also has flying saucers appearing at times.
So here's what I'll say about Chris Bledsoe. First of all, Chris Bledsoe is one of the kindest, gentlest, most authentic human beings I have ever met. The fact that in addition to his kindness and generosity, he also has a measurable connection with a phenomenon is just incredible. But what we don't know is what that phenomenon is. Now, when I agreed to participate with Skinwalker Ranch in the study of Chris Bledsoe, my interest was not in finding connections to aliens or life forms or what Chris considers some of these orbs to be, which are almost celestial, right? Almost like angelic in nature. What was interesting to me is this man a type of canary in the coal mine that can give us advanced warning of a threat? And by all measurable data, the answer is yes. Whether it is a secret spy satellite or a foreign drone or a UFO, Chris Bledsoe can somehow see it happen before it arrives, and we can measure that with an EEG. That is a person to me who is of great interest, not just to the scientific community, but to the military-industrial complex.
Yeah. And of course, a lot of these things could be legitimate. I've had on Ryan Graves, a F-18 pilot, who is working now to have encounters declassified to destigmatize possible near miss encounters, which according to him are always accident. Basically, we call it a near miss, but it's effectively equivalent to an accident as far as the government is concerned. And so, at worst, he'll be able to protect pilots, airlines, civil aviation, et cetera. And at best, quote unquote, from my perspective as an alien adjacent hunter, it would be incredible to learn more about those phenomena. Okay, John Anderson asks, the spy history book from 2021, Sleeper Agent, tells the story of George Koval, an American-born Soviet spy who infiltrated the Manhattan Project, the top secret program to develop the atomic weapon. So he's recommending that book, but it gives me a chance to ask you about what kinds of vulnerabilities. You're not in the CIA anymore. What would you be telling, who's the director now? I always forget.
I lost it. Yeah, Brennan.
But
no, it's not Brennan.
No, he was.
He was Brennan.
We'll look at
Burns. Director Burns.
Yeah. So, Director Burns, you have his ear for 30 minutes. What kinds of things would you be saying? Like, look out for that guy, Brian Keating. What would you be telling him? What are the kind of vectors that provide a surface area for attack in our modern, incredibly highly technological age? Is it plant someone at OpenAI, or what would you do?
If I had 30 minutes with Director Burns, I would spend the entire time just telling him that he needs to refocus the CIA, because CIA has been used now over the last 4-ish years for things that it's not supposed to do, right? As an example, CIA is the lead negotiator with the United States between Hamas and Israel. Why is Director Burns the lead negotiator? He is not a diplomat. He's a career intelligence officer. Right. That's not what CIA needs to be doing.
Elected to do that, right?
Right. CIA needs to be focused on creating the kind of assets and agents that can keep us at the forefront of what's known as American primacy or American dominance in the fight, in the war, in the information conflict of the world. Instead, we're focused on woke culture and fitting into bureaucratic standards. Like, if there's one institution where equal opportunity and woke culture and diversity,
right,
where these things should not be forced it's CIA. Because CIA has always been inherently diverse. It's been diverse before diverse was a thing, right? It's been accepting lesbians and homosexuals and gays and transgender.
Because they're useful.
They're useful, exactly.
Like you are useful, right?
Long before it was mandatory or cultural, they've already been doing it. But now what ends up happening is, because CIA is a government agency, and a government agency has to be a tool of the administration, and the administration wants to demonstrate its administrative successes to its electoral base, right? Now you see rainbow advertisements coming out looking for CIA officers. We don't need to hire gay people at CIA. We need to hire effective people at CIA. It's even better if the effective person is also gay. It's not the other way around. So Director Burns has found himself in an unenviable position where he's the director of an organization that's being manhandled by an administration coming off of a previous administration that didn't trust CIA at all. So it's been like 6 or 7 years for CIA.
Here's a salty one, okay? How can we hear anything? This is from Sir Philosopher. How can we hear anything he says without a salt mine to go with it? There's no such thing as a former CIA officer.
There is no such thing as a former CIA officer. I mean, that is the honest to God truth. Here's the thing. CIA doesn't pay my bill anymore. They don't pay me a paycheck. They don't give me health insurance. They don't protect my life. They don't protect my family. They don't promise me anything. But if I got called tomorrow to do something to help CIA, I would say yes. That's why there's no such thing as a former CIA officer. And here's the no kidding truth, right? Anybody who has a problem understanding that my loyalty is first and foremost to my country, and that my loyalty is first and foremost among all agencies to the Central Intelligence Agency, can go to hell, because they've never had a cause so worthy. They've never had a loyalty so true to something they believed in so much that their only option is to criticize me.
Right.
I don't care.
They're the Ian Rice.
They're the ones that are lacking. Yeah. They're the ones that are missing. It's not me. So absolutely, there's no such thing as a former CIA officer. Even the CIA officers who leave CIA and write books shaming and damning and criticizing the CIA, guess what would happen if they got a call today from Director Burns?
They would do it.
They would say, yes, sir, you tell me what you need me to do to protect my mother, my children, my spouse, my country. There's nothing we wouldn't do, right? And that is the nature of how they hire us and how they train us. So we are fairly unapologetic to all the naysayers out there. If anything, naysayers, keep commenting on how you think we're fake, because your comments create activity on YouTube and on social media that make more people find us who agree with us.
That's right.
So I love anybody out there who wants to be a critic.
The ultimate for the algorithm. Yeah, I got a couple of those. Once a spook, always a spook from somebody else.
Yep.
Is that a derogatory term?
So here's what's hilarious, right? People use the term spook like it's derogatory. They don't know that inside CIA, inside the intelligence community, spook is like the top premier thing that you can call each other.
So it's not like a pig.
Not at all.
Cops don't call each other pigs.
No, like when we talk to DGSE, or when we talk to MI6, or when MI6 talks to Mossad, or when we talk to, the BND in Germany, we're always like, oh, that dude's a real spook. Like, that dude is a ghost.
It's a term of
You don't even know where they're at. You don't know where they've been. They do amazing things. But then you get out and they're like, spook this and spook that. And you're like, oh, wow, I didn't know I was good enough to be determined as a spook.
So, Children of Chem 1618, I consider that for one of my kids' names, by the way. He says, Mockingbird is still going strong. I don't trust anyone who gives this guy a platform. Okay, so he doesn't trust me. He's literally turning podcasters into useful idiots. Wow, I consider myself a useless genius, actually. Not a useful idiot. This podcast is turning into way more control narrative. Beware of those who come bearing gifts. So what is Mockingbird? Do you know what that refers to?
I'm guessing they're talking about Operation Mockingbird, which was a disinformation campaign. And it was a legit disinformation campaign. So speaking of pre-9/11 CIA, right? Not that this guy deserves whatever. Child of the corn, right? Whatever your name is. There was a very real time when I believe it was Director Colby at CIA who made it a personal mission to ensure that the American public was intentionally misinformed about the Soviet Union completely. Like, there's this famous quote out there, I believe it was from Colby, where he said something like, I won't rest until everything the American public believes about the USSR is untrue. because he was so dedicated to essentially creating a disinformation campaign against the idea of communism, right? But regardless, it's a perfect example of what this person is legitimately referring to, right? Disinformation is real, and prior to 9/11, the agency went recklessly into creating disinformation campaigns for whatever they thought was important, right? Whatever the executive thought they should make an important priority. That's not the world we live in today, and disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation are harder than ever to actually police because there's so much information, things get drowned out. So there's so much good information, bad information, and wrong information. It's so much of it, it's actually hard to intentionally create it because there's so much of it.
Wow. Okay, last audience question before we pivot to my final question. How do you maintain control of your specific goal for the direction of development through a large organization? Is there some, general tips besides the ones that you mentioned of coachability, learn? Those are sort of on the receiving end, but in terms of being proactive, any tools from your work at the agency to apply to such situations were general advice for people to exceed, maybe making use of manipulating, tools of human psychology?
Absolutely. So it's a great question, and it's very simple, right? The thing that most people get wrong is they're looking at the next step. It's an amateur move to look at the next step. Have you heard of what's known as a moving goalpost? The next step is a moving goalpost, because just like we talked about, every day we create new data, every day we create new natural resources. Well, guess what that means about the next step? It changes every day. What we need to be doing is looking 2 steps ahead. So in the corporate workplace, let's give it a very simple example. In the corporate workplace, you have a boss. You shouldn't be looking at your boss for what you should do day to day. You should be looking at your boss's boss. Because if you do something today that fits the needs of your boss's boss, guess what you do simultaneously? You make your boss look good. So you look good and your boss looks good, and your boss's boss notices both of you.
That's right.
So now, whether your boss gets promoted or whether your boss's boss reaches down to promote you, you have 2 opportunities for success. Everybody else who's just trying to make the boss happy, they're completely being overlooked by the boss's boss, right? And furthermore, because they're not contributing to the boss's success directly, the boss doesn't notice them either. So if you want to be one of the few that ride the coattails of the boss and or skip the boss's office altogether and go direct to the top, you need to be thinking 2 steps ahead. How do I make not my supervisor happy? How do I make my director, who is the responsible party for my supervisor, how do I make that person happy? Because that makes everyone in the chain happy. And then when you start to build a reputation of being able to solve problems at the director level, now what ends up happening is people see you as a reliable, trustworthy resource, and they want to incentivize you to stay. So how do they incentivize you? They either promote you or they pay you more. Regardless, you get what you want, right? You get more power, more responsibility, more successful operations. I had, when I left CIA and I first went into corporate America, I had this fantastic senior vice president who was automating everything, right? So I was one of like 15 analysts, and they made it very clear that they were seeking to automate all of our jobs. And for me, I was like, awesome. Like, this is not a job that I want to do anyways. So let's automate it. And that senior vice president, during a one-on-one, when he was talking to me, he was like, here's the deal, Andy. We don't need 15 people. We need 2. And the 2 that we are going to find from all 15 of these folks are the 2 that realize when you work yourself out of a job, there's always a new job for you. The person who can't work themselves out of a job is a useless person. But the person who can work themselves out of a job is a person that you put into another job knowing they will work themselves out of that job too.
It's funny that you mentioned the boss's boss, just to add a little, inside academia. So oftentimes we have to hire professors, they start as junior professors, 35-year-old. And then, it's actually, some of my older colleagues are jaded. They'll say it's worse than getting married, because at least when you get married, you get divorced if it doesn't work, but tenure is permanent. So like some of these people, we spend more time at our workday than we do with our spouses, right? So you're actually literally around your whole life, much more with your colleagues in the academia. So when I'm being confronted with hiring somebody or a position, we all get letters of recommendation. Big deal, right? But what I always do is go to the people that wrote the letter of recommendation. I know what they're going to say. They wouldn't agree to write. No one's malevolent, it's Machiavellian that's going to write a condemning letter of recommendation, right? So I always think, well, let's go to those people. Let's get the letter of recommendation for the letter of recommendation writer. Sort of the same idea, not to please the boss's boss, but actually just to shortcut, like, what is this person? What are their goals? Why are they motivated to promote? Are they trying to foist somebody off? I've done it. I've had bad employees. I was like, you got to get out of here.
Yeah.
And, oh, this is a great employee. Yeah, you should definitely go and work for, Podunk State University. Okay. But you also brought up one more thing when you mentioned next steps. And I'm a chess player. I have the exponent, the third power of my rating is at 1,000. I'm not very good at it, but always thinking 2 moves ahead, 3 moves ahead, however many you can move ahead. It seems to me that, this weekend's, phenomenal raid, rescue of hostages, from the Gaza Strip, save 4 hostages. Tragically, the mission commander was killed. But that was the only casualty on the Israeli side. This is being celebrated, much needed win for Israel. I am glad the hostages were rescued. But did they think 2 moves ahead? I mean, now what are the downstream consequences? Is Hamas going to now booby trap hostages? Are they going to do psychological warfare on the remaining hostages or on the families of dead hostages? What mistakes do you think Israel might have made in this, raid on the sun, so to speak?
It's bigger. It's the 2 steps is bigger than this raid, right? Hamas isn't trying to win hostages. That's not what they're trying to do. Hamas is trying to undermine international faith in the institution of Israel. That's what Hamas is trying to do. And they're succeeding. Israel's more distant and isolated than it's ever been. The Hamas is no longer referred to as a terrorist organization. They are now referred to as
Governing organization.
The governing organization of Gaza, right? Think about where we were October 8th. October 8th, everything that came out from the Gaza Strip was always caveated with this information cannot be verified because Hamas is a terrorist organization. Even though they're still identified as a terrorist organization, now in June, nobody talks about them that way. Now they're just the legitimate government of
the health ministry.
The health ministry, the
right. Casualties.
Exactly, right? That's what they are now. That's all evidence that Israel's losing the 2-step game. Benny Gantz, right, stepped out of the war cabinet. That's losing the 2-step game. When the 3 people who constitute your war cabinet can't even agree, what is that? What is the message that sends to the world? Right? How is it that Vladimir Putin, who we all thought would be unseated, who everybody said was going to be ousted from within, who they said was going to be killed and assassinated within the first few months of his invasion in Ukraine, how is it that that person, who is a true autocrat, how is it that that person has a stronger economy and more power and more relationships than ever before, but the true democracy of Israel is calling for re-election to oust Netanyahu, who has his problems? Netanyahu's got his problems, right? Yeah. But the country of Israel is a secure democratic institution.
That's right. It's like Western democracy. Yeah.
It's stellar in terms of its record of being a democracy, unlike Ukraine, right? Yeah. But what's happened is Israel has been successfully agitated by Iran through Hamas, and now Yemen's playing a role in it, and Hezbollah's playing a role in it in Lebanon, and it's getting worse and worse because Netanyahu, as Benny Gantz is saying, has taken it in a very political way. Netanyahu knows that if they fix the problem, he's got political issues, but the country of Israel's happier. So he's at a place now where he can keep things agitated, and the attention is on Gaza and Israeli safety instead of on Netanyahu's shortcomings. He can't avoid that forever. But the thing that for me is so sad, to your point, thinking 2 steps ahead, we need to get 2 steps ahead of Iran and what Iran is trying to do in unraveling Israel. The 2-state solution and the respect of Palestinians, that's not what we should be worrying about right now. We should be worrying about how we keep Iran from creating this kind of a mess in the Western world so that we can give the Palestinians the opportunity for self-governance, so that we can give Israel the semblance of safety, so that we can find a working solution, whatever that solution is. But right now we can't find that because we're dealing with a bunch of bullshit that's being kicked around by some assholes in Iran.
Yeah. Andy Bustamante, this has been a great pleasure to have you down here in San Diego. Thanks for coming down. Sorry the weather didn't cooperate, but hopefully we'll have you back when the world settles down and World War III is over. As Einstein said, I don't know what weapons World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. Hopefully old Albert was wrong and we won't ever get to that point. But Andy, thanks to men and women like you with the courage, the bravery, the patriotism, and just the skills. We stand in awe and gratitude of your work.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks a lot.
Hey, if you watched all the way to the end, I know you're going to love my interview with Danny Jones. And click here for a playlist of the best episodes on Into the Impossible from the past few weeks.